William Hamblin is professor of history at BYU. He received his PhD from the University of Michigan. He specializes in ancient warfare for the most part, and is most recently the co-author with David Seeley of the Thames and Hudson book, Solomon's Temple, Myth and History, which we all highly recommend. He's also been kicked out of Pakistan by the United States government, if I remember correctly. So his paper is What is the Chariot in Ezekiel 1? So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hamblin.
Well, I should tell you that Dan, I asked Dan for more time. He said he wouldn't give me any more than anybody else. And then he asked me to write a letter of recommendation for him. Well, I thought he was smarter than that, but I guess not. I'm going to talk about Ezekiel's chariot, and I think there are some interesting connections with the temple, so we'll just proceed. I've got too much stuff, so I will stop blabbering and just start talking. But I do have a new class that we're doing this winter called Temples and Civilizations. It's History 390R, so if any students here are interested, they can come take this and we can go into a lot of more detail on some of these things. Now, I should say that what I'm going to talk about is somewhat speculative. The problem, of course, is that lack of data and ambiguity of data means that a lot of what we have to say about Ezekiel's chariot has to be speculative. So, take it for what it's worth, but, I recognize that some of it's tenuous, but I think there's some interesting things. Now, Ezekiel, we're looking at Ezekiel chapter 1 mainly, but also chapter 10, which kind of repeats and amplifies some of the things found in chapter 1. I'm using, for the quotations I'll present, the NRSV. It's based on the King James, but modified to some degree, so you can follow along in King James versions, look up some of the same things there. Basically, these chapters are visions of Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a prophet, a priest in the temple. He went into exile in Babylon, and while there he had visions of a number of different things, including kind of an eschatological temple in chapters 40 to 48. But in this these two chapters, 1 and 10, he's seen this strange vehicle. He doesn't actually call it a Merkabah, but later tradition does. So what I'm going to do is essentially argue that what Ezekiel's Merkabah represents is a portable Holy of Holies from the temple. So it's a mobile temple on wheels, if you will. And I'm just going to go through different passages in Ezekiel, do some comparison with some other passages, and take a look at some of the evidence for this. The first thing to note is Ezekiel in chapter 1 talks about the HAYYOT, or the four living creatures, these strange composite beings. But later in the chapter, in 10, 15, and 20, he talks about CHERUBIM, which are the creatures or divine beings that are found in the Holy of Holies. Now, cherubim are mentioned in a number of different contexts, mainly however, in association with the Garden of Eden, or in association with the temple, or association with the throne of God. That's basically it. Now, they're often equated with angels, but in fact, they're never called angels as far as I can tell in the Old Testament. But cherubim are mentioned in the Holy of Holies, and there's four of them. There's two on the ark, and then there's two beside the ark that have their wings overarching on top of the ark. So there's four HAYYOT, or cherubim, in Ezekiel's vision. There's four in the Holy of Holies. So that's the first parallel that you've got. Now, these cherubs have four faces, and this is rather an odd thing. They also have four wings. So they're described in very strange terms. What you can see on this particular panel here is the four faces are a human, lion, ox, and eagle in 1:6, but they are a cherub, human, lion, and eagle in 10:14. Now, the obvious connection there, the green words, is that the ox and the cherub, face of a cherub is the face of an ox or a cow. It's a bovine face. That leads us to one possible speculation, that the 12 oxen holding the brazen sea are described as oxen, could be understood as cherubim, because they have the face of a cherub as described in Ezekiel. Now, from the ancient Near Eastern context, we have a number of examples of these types of beings. I don't want to call them angels because that's kind of a later assumption. I think they're associated with what the Bible calls the sons of God, that they're sons of God, and those overlap with the angels to some extent. But here you can see an example from Ain Dara, a little bit earlier than Solomon's temple, but roughly the same period. And you can see these creatures here. You've got a lion, human, bull, and eagle head. So exactly the same faces as described in Ezekiel's vision, and they're holding something up, presumably the celestial realm or something like that. You know, the heavens, holding something along those lines. So there's a kind of contextualization of what they may have looked like. Now we've also got another characteristic of the cherubs in Ezekiel is that their wings are touching. The only other place in the Bible where the wings of cherubs are described as touching each other is in the Holy of Holies, where the wings of the cherubs overarch and touch one another. There's a number of ancient Near Eastern examples of this type of thing. This is from Arslan Tash. It's an Egyptianizing work, but you can see two flanking beings there with their wings touching. This is a tomb of Ai from 13th century. You can see again the creatures here on the corners. They're on the four corners of the sarcophagus, and their wings are outstretched, almost touching there, overlapping here. Then you've got this example, which might be more pertinent to our particular discussion, and that is you've got something being borne by priests, and it's a solar bark or a royal bark, and on it you've got these flanking figures with the wings touching and overlapping. Now, in the Egyptian tradition, I think the solar bark played the role of the chariot in more Mesopotamian and Syrian related traditions. Here's another one from Egypt, and in this particular case, again, you've got the priest bearing the throne, and it's in the form of a portable shrine. You see, it's supposed to be a sacred room, flanked by lion creatures and these composite creatures, and then the king and the winged figures kind of overarching and touching or protecting him. So that's probably the ancient Near Eastern context for these types of ideas. So second parallel then is the existence of cherubs. Then you've got the wings touching, which is unique to the Holy of Holies in Ezekiel's vision. There's also a discussion of coals of fire. Within this vehicle that Ezekiel sees, it's got these cherubs and wheels and different things. He talks about the fire being there, and he talks about coals you can get from this fire. Now, he never explicitly describes it as an altar, but in other passages like Isaiah 6:6 and Revelation 8:5, it's clear that the coals of fire that the angels are getting come from the incense altar, and that's, again, associated with the inner rooms of the temple. So probably coals from the altar is another parallel, and that what Ezekiel's got inside these cherubs is this altar. Big question arises is what Ezekiel's describing a chariot. Now, the technical term is merkabah, and he never calls it that. He just says, he calls it galgal, he calls it all sorts of different things. He never calls it explicitly a chariot. However, Jewish tradition saw it in that way, and of course the rabbis go wild with this stuff. We're not going to get into the rabbinic stuff. That's a whole other story. But Sirach 49:8 explicitly talks about Ezekiel's vision and says what he saw was the chariot of the cherubim. And there's another example of this from the temple in 1 Chronicles 28:18. You can see there was a golden chariot of cherubim in the temple, and they had their wings spread out, just like Ezekiel is describing. Now this is inside the temple. What exactly it was, we don't know. We have very little data about this, but my assumption is that whatever Ezekiel's seen is probably related to this golden chariot of the cherubim. Now, it may be also the same thing as the chariot of the sun, because Josiah, during his reformations, destroyed or removed this chariot of the sun, he calls it, and it may have been a different vehicle, but my assumption is that the solar chariot, the cherubim chariot, and what Ezekiel says are probably parallel concepts. Again, sometimes these links are tenuous, but that's kind of what I'm working towards. Here you can see a wheeled vehicle with chariots on it. This is from Cyprus, but you've got these winged creatures. This is a bad picture. I couldn't find a better one, but and then the wheels down here. This is a bronze laver that they push around and use it to wash their hands and purify stuff in a temple context. Divine chariots are also known from other sources, and here's some Mesopotamian ones, where you can see the strange winged figure is pulling the chariot, and then you can see the gods and so